I'm a first-year PhD student and I'm based at the Faculty of Divinity. So I thought what I'd do over the next 5 minutes is just kind of outline the basic contours and the themes that I'll be dealing with in my thesis. I'm only about a month in, so this is still very much work in progress. So broadly, my research is pivoted on the configuration of religious styles of nationalism articulated in late colonial India, so late 19th century onwards, and the specific religious vocabularies and the political philosophical discourses that were creatively reworked and adapted for the nationalist project, or projects in the plural. So essentially, how were quote unquote nationalist thinkers in this period drawing on certain local religio-cultural images and themes to imagine and formulate the goal of independence? So some of the broad themes that kind of underpin my research considerations are these 4 isms, as it were. And you'll see that I've italicized the ism in each term because part of my research will seek to interrogate the kind of stability of these categories, particularly in reference to the Indian colonial context. So the first 2 are, of course, nationalism and communalism. So across this period in India, what we find are really quite robust regional and communal nationalisms, which don't straightforwardly map onto a vision of the nation state. In other words, the unit of the nation, like what or who constitutes the nation, was not conceptualized in identical ways by nationalist thinkers. And the idea of an all-embracing Indian nation, or even of a nation as focalized in specific territories, was not the cornerstone of many nationalist expressions. The second 2 isms, particularism and universalism, are, I suppose, the kind of the guiding motifs of my research project. And if all of this has sounded really abstract so far, my study of these themes is rooted in the works of 2 major philosopher poets of the Indian subcontinent, Muhammad Iqbal, who's often regarded as the spiritual father of Pakistan, and Rabindranath Tagore, 2 of whose Bengali songs are the national anthems of India and Bangladesh. Many of you may be familiar with both or one of these 2 figures, particularly Tagore, who was the first non-European to receive the Nobel Prize in 1913. So I'll be taking up this kind of relationship between the universal and the particular, which I highlighted before, in the work of these 2 thinkers across 3 main conceptual strands. So the first is largely theological. So I'll be thinking about how in their religious writings, the relation of the infinite God and the finite self is formulated as a fundamentally non-competitive one. In other words, for both of these thinkers, to be properly and fully oriented to God is not to lose or deny one's subjective sense of freedom, for the infinite or the universal divine is the very ground and goal of that particular self. So here are some quotes of both thinkers which highlight this viewpoint. Tagore notes quite beautifully, in my opinion, the individual I am, or the self, attains its perfect end when it realizes its harmony in the infinite I am, or God. And Iqbal writes, the true infinite does not exclude the finite, it embraces the finite without effacing its finitude. The second strand is what I've provisionally titled Epistemological, which is really considering how these thinkers understand the relationship between the human particularities of art, aesthetics, and emotion, and the universal or objective truths of science. So in this regard, Tagore affirms, for example, that there's something fundamentally different about the reality of paper and the reality of literature. In other words, literature embodies or partakes in a level of meaning or truth that the mere physical reality of paper cannot contain. And Iqbal notes on this theme that science is, quote, a mass of sectional views of reality. And so religion, which demands or pertains to the whole of reality, does not need to be afraid of scientific truths, for they are partial in nature. And finally, I return to the theme with which I started, the question of the particular self and its place in the cultural, the global order. So both thinkers, Tagore and Iqbal, emphatically criticized what they saw as the evils of an insular and aggressive nationalism, even as they affirmed the role of cultural particularity and difference. So Iqbal says here, quote, "All men and not just Muslims are meant for the kingdom of God on earth." But he also affirmed that Islam is a particular cultural force with its own sacred history and moral character. And for Tagore as well, cultural and religious differences must not be sacrificed at the altar of a unifying nationalism. Indeed, true universalism, as Iqbal reminded us at the beginning, does not efface the particular, but supports and sustains it. So in sum, I think these three strands of Tagore and Iqbal's works, A, the theological, so the self and God relation, 2, the epistemological, so the religious science relation, and 3, the socio-historical, so the role of one's particular cultural identity in the global context. I think these three themes really give us a window into thinking about how, for these two thinkers, religious, philosophical, and national concerns stand not as isolated domains, but as dynamic aspects of a single whole within the overarching theme of how the particular relates to the universal. And I think I will stop there.